The Vought F4U Corsair. What a beast. This thing is such an iconic bit of machinery. When it comes to American fighter aircraft, this thing must be near the top in terms of a distinctive design and famous name, and I'm so glad that we finally got access to it in Battlefield 5. Primarily used as a fighter bomber in Battlefield 5, the F4U Corsair is one of the most powerful vehicles in the game, and in this video I'm going to take a look at the most powerful loadouts whilst dropping some really interesting history in there as well. The F4U Corsair was the first of several successful fighter designs built around Pratt & Whitney's R2800 double wasp engine, an engine that would later go on to power the Hellcat. Hopefully we will see that Hellcat at some point in Battlefield 5, as it was actually better at carrier landings when compared to the Corsair, and became the United States Navy's dominant fighter in the second half of the Pacific War. The F4U Corsair was still a beast for land-based use though, and served almost exclusively as a fighter bomber throughout the Korean War, and saw use in other air forces as well into the 1960s. Some Japanese pilots regarded it as the most formidable American fighter in World War II, and its naval aviators achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio. When I was doing a bit of research for this video, I came across a really interesting story about the life of the F4U Corsair. Yes, we know the Corsair to be a formidable aircraft, and it's arguably as iconic as any vehicle in the war, but it wasn't always so easy. I also came across the most insane pilot of all time, so stick around for a story that will certainly be worth remembering. After that, we'll get onto the loadouts. Life didn't start out that well for the F4U Corsair, with the first recorded combat engagement on the 11th of February 1943 being far from successful. Corsairs assisted P-40s and P-38s in escorting a formation of consolidated B-24 Liberators on a raid against a Japanese aerodrome at Kahili. Japanese fighters contested the raid and the Americans got the worst of it, with 4 P-38s, 2 P-40s, 2 Corsairs and 2 Liberators lost. No more than 4 Japanese Zeros were destroyed, and the Corsair was responsible for one of those kills, albeit due to a mid-air collision. The Fiasco has since been referred to as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Due to the urgent need for fighter squadrons in the Solomon Islands area in the summer of 1943, Marine Fighting Squadron 214 was unorthodoxly cobbled together under the command of Major Gregory Pappy Boyington. The Americans quickly learnt from their mistakes, and soon realised the potential of the mighty Corsair. By May, the Corsair units were getting the upper hand, and Squadron 214 had produced the first Corsair ace, 2nd Lieutenant Kenneth A. Walsh, who would rack up a total of 21 kills in total during the war. He quickly learned that altitude was paramount, and was recorded saying, "Whoever had altitude dictated the terms of the battle, and there was nothing a Zero pilot could do to change that." The F4U could outperform a Zero in every aspect except slow speed manoeuvrability and slow speed rate of climb. Therefore, you avoided getting slow whenever combating a Zero. It took time, but eventually we developed tactics and deployed them very effectively. Of my 21 victories, 17 were against Zeros, and I lost 5 aircraft in combat. I was shot down 3 times, and I crashed one that ploughed into the line back at base and wiped out another F4U. Corsairs were flown by the Black Sheep Squadron, led by Marine Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, in an area of the Solomon Islands called the Slot. Part of that squad was a Marine Lieutenant who went by the name of Klingman, and he pulled off one of the most unusual kills in the war. Klingman was in the pursuit of a Kawasaki Ki-45, also known as a Nick, which was a twin-engined fighter, and at high altitude, after chasing it, his guns jammed due to the gun lubrication thickening from the extreme cold. He flew up above the enemy aircraft that also had a rear gunner shooting at him, and chopped off the Nick's tail with his big propeller of the Corsair. On the second strike, his propeller flung the Japanese machine gun and its gunner into empty sky. Still, the Japanese plane continued to fly. The third strike severed the tail of the plane and put both planes into an uncontrollable spin, with the Nick breaking apart and the Corsair eventually levelling out. Despite missing 5 inches off the front of his propeller blades, he managed to continue. The plane even ran out of fuel at around 10,000 feet, however, he still made it back to the airfield, bouncing and eventually stopping safely after this aerial ramming attack. On inspection of the plane, pieces of the Japanese aircraft were stuck in the engine cowling with bullet holes all down one wing. He was awarded the Navy Cross and was quoted saying just after landing, "It's a hell of a way to earn a buck." Marine Lieutenant R.R. Klingman was a badass, there's no doubt about that at all, but another guy that I've mentioned before, Gregory Boyington, was also an incredible person. I recently discovered that F4U Corsairs were rarely flown by the same pilot every day, so he would always take the one that was in the worst condition, so the rest of his crew didn't have to fly it. As we now know, the Corsair was not always suited to landing on aircraft carriers, and therefore was deployed as a land-based fighter bomber. Interestingly, despite Battlefield 5 seeming fairly unrealistic with the napalm and massive bombs available to the Corsair, they are somewhat realistic. Apparently, Charles Lindbergh, who amongst other things was an American military officer and aviator, managed to get the F4U into the air with 4,000 pounds of bombs attached. The Corsair could also be kitted out with high explosive bombs, tanks of napalm, high velocity aircraft rockets, tiny TIM rockets, and glide bombs. When it comes to Battlefield 5, there are a few ways to set up your Corsair, and taking into account that these things were actually used in real life, it's a really nice feature. Are you after a pure dogfighter, an infantry farming machine, or a tank busting fortress? There are a few options, not only with the 2 variants of Corsair, but also with the specialisations. Starting out with the Corsair F4U-1A, this is the ultimate anti-infantry farmer in the game, but also a pretty handy anti-tank aircraft as well. There are 2 loadouts that I would recommend. Firstly, the anti-infantry loadout can be seen on screen now. Noticeable specialisations are the 4x20mm high explosive cannons and incendiary bombs. The second loadout again goes for the 4x20mm high explosive cannons, but then the 1,000 pound bomb and anti-tank mines. The mines can also be used to trap planes on the runway, but that tactic is questionable. The second variant of the Corsair, the F4U-1C, is a pure air-to-air beast if you choose the 6x HMGs as rank 1. This variant has access to the glide bomb, however that thing isn't really too effective considering the effort you have to put into leading a target, and I'd sooner go for the heavy-hitting 5-inch FFAR rockets. To finish off the video, I'm just going to give you a few interesting facts about the F4U Corsair, some of which you can actually experience in Battlefield 5. The aircraft has a really unique and quite noticeable whistle. You'll hear that whenever the plane is dive bombing you, although as you can see in the background and hear in the background in a second, you can actually hear it yourself from inside the cockpit. The Bikini Atoll skin for the Corsair is based on the paint scheme for the F-6F Hellcat instrument drones during the Bikini Atoll atomic bomb tests. It's quite a vivid red skin and really noticeable on the battlefield. The plane houses a folding wing design, making up for the lack of space on aircraft carriers. The Hellcat also has a design which is quite interesting to look at, saving more space when on an aircraft carrier, and maybe DICE will introduce that plane at a later date. There was a night fighter variant of the Corsair, and although these became more popular after the war, some existed during World War II. Maybe we'll get a paint job that relates to that in a future update. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. It was one where I took a look back at the history of the Corsair and a few of its most noticeable pilots. If you have anything interesting, leave it down in the comments. Maybe you are having fun in the Corsair on Battlefield 5 and have a few tactics that you wish to share, or maybe a bit of history that I haven't mentioned in this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.